Welcome to Grieving Out Loud. I'm Angela Kennecke. You may have noticed I haven't put out a podcast in a few weeks. I have been suffering from laryngitis after getting bronchitis. I apologize, my voice is still pretty rough, so please just bear with me. But I've been wanting to have Dr. Melissa Dittberner, or Dr. Mo, as she's known to her students, on the podcast for some time now. Dr. Mo began using meth at a very young age.
I remember it clearly. The first time I ever did meth, I was in the backseat of a car with a bunch of my friends, and they were just like, here, try this, inhale it. I didn't ask a question. I trusted them. I didn't think they would ever, try and harm me or hurt me. I didn't know what it was going to do to me. But I remember, being up all night, and I had a couple beers, and I was just like, oh man, this is crazy feeling. And I realized that I liked it because it numbed out a lot of other things.
Dr. Mo has had such a storied life. After giving up methamphetamines when she became a mom, and eventually a single mom, she turned to alcohol. This high school dropout was a welder and roller derby queen before eventually earning her Ph.D. in addiction studies. She has a deep understanding of addiction, both personal and professional, and shares her insight with us today. Well, Dr. Mo, thank you so much for joining me today and for putting up with my raspy voice. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Now, I met you through one of your students who was helping us with our education curriculum. And she said, you have to meet Dr. Mo. You have to meet this woman. She is amazing. And since I've gotten to know you over the last several months, I have to agree. You are an addiction studies professor at the University of South Dakota, but you have your own personal story, your own personal battle with substance use disorder that you want to share with us today.
Yes, I am a professor. It's one of my favorite things that I get to do. And I do have my own personal story, which is what got me into the field anyways. My parents got a divorce when I was about 12 years old, and I didn't really have the coping skills to deal with what that looked like. And so I found myself kind of hanging out with a bit rougher crowd than I would have before then, and just finding that way to have that interaction with other people that I felt like understood me. And so it wasn't long before I found out that substances helped me cope, or at least made me feel better in the moment. And so I kind of got started pretty early, I guess, if you will. And I would say by the time I was 14, the first time that I used meth. And I kept it at a dull roar for a while until it got a little out of hand. I ended up being quite thin, quite unhealthy, and friends were starting to get pretty concerned. I probably struggled with methamphetamine use for 3 or 4 years before I realized it was going to kill me. I moved to Phoenix when I was about 17 years old, and it turns out there's a gigantic world of drugs there that I had never seen, coming from Nebraska, and again fell in with the wrong crowd and just realized again that this will kill me. I overdosed when I was in Phoenix, and that feeling was pretty horrible. And I didn't really want to go through that again. I didn't get a lot of time to learn how to cope. I didn't get a lot of time to learn how to navigate emotions and just be a human, really. To be honest with you, I just didn't have any of those skills. And so when I started to get sober, it was a lot of, looking back now, I can see it was a lot of actions that would have been for a younger child. I didn't know how to interact with other people in a way that was always necessarily positive, and I just had anger that I didn't know how to utilize. And so as I kind of navigated some of that, I started to get sober, and it was great. I had my first daughter, and she was about a month old before somebody brought us meth as a gift, right, to the house. And I wasn't breastfeeding her, so I decided I would try it again, see how it went, and realized it was not for me, and that I would not play that game again. And so I spent a few years sober, still learning how to navigate life as a human without the coping skills that I needed. I did not really have a lot of support at the time. I was kind of off on my own with my oldest daughter's dad, and just it wasn't a very great relationship. And so we just kind of floated through life, both of us, just struggling with addiction and trying to understand things. I stayed sober for a while. And it just, when you're around it too much, it's easy to fall back into it. After I had my son, I swore that I would never do anything again after the last time that I had gotten sick when my daughter was young. And I found myself just getting a little out of control again, not being able to understand. We bought a house, and a housewarming gift is not a bag of Coke, but for some people it is. And again, I found myself kind of overdosing and just found like I couldn't handle what it looked like. So that was the last day, would have been, I don't know, 20, almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago, that I used meth. But I didn't learn how to navigate things and life and emotions and feelings. So I found myself struggling with alcohol down the road. I really believe that it doesn't matter what substance you find yourself with, it's just a coping mechanism for things that you don't know how to deal with. And so I had to navigate what alcoholism looked like, again, quitting something and, falling out of control of my life and, being a single mom and not having the skills to do that and worrying about my kids and, using that as a coping mechanism too for drinking. Oh, I'm worried about how I'm going to do this or that. And I became a welder. I knew I needed to take care of my kids in a way that I could make a little bit more money. My kid's dad and I split, and I was a single mom, and I needed something that was going to pay the bills. So I became a welder, and I worked at a place that was a little unhealthy for. I don't know, a woman working in a man's world can sometimes be difficult. And this job proved to be just that. There was a little bit of struggle between me and management, and I am so strong-willed and strong-headed that I just wouldn't give up. I wouldn't quit. I just wasn't going to happen. And I did end up getting fired, which I'm not proud of, but nothing too crazy happened. I rode a pallet jack, and it was a great way for them to fire me. Anyways, I skipped out of that place. I was so happy. I had my welding helmet in hand, and I knew I got to see my kids more, and I didn't have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was going to be great, right? Until I realized that, oh yeah, I don't have any money to take care of these kids. So I took a week. I hung out with the kids. We just hung out, and it was great. And then I realized, okay, well, that week is over and now it's go time. I was a high school dropout. I dropped out when I was in ninth grade. And so I didn't have anything to fall back on. So I went and got my GED, and I realized that I was really getting passionate about what addiction looked like. And so I reached out to some prevention centers in Sioux Falls and said, hey, if you ever need someone to speak about what addiction looks like, because my oldest kid's dad had struggled with addiction too. And it was really hard as a person to watch him go through that. Not only myself and my own addiction, but to love someone with addiction is a whole nother ball of wax, right? And so I said, I would love to speak. If there's ever anything I can do, and just trying to get myself in the door, I didn't really know how. And so, they basically told me like, well, you don't really have any education, and we can't really just let people in off the street like that, which I wish, I do now. When I have people speak, it's people with lived experience. I think it's so important, like today, and so I realized, okay, if education is the thing, then I guess I'm going to go get my GED and go back to school. So I think it was that September, I got my GED, and then I signed up for classes starting in January. And literally I have been at USD since 2008, either being a student, working towards getting my PhD, which I've been a doctor for the last 3 years, or educating myself, and now I'm educating others, and I absolutely love it. And that's the quick slingshot from my story, from addiction and struggling, into where I am today, helping people who struggle. So
that is an incredible story. I think it's a movie. I think I want to write the script. I'm just thinking of you being a welder, but when you started the drugs at such a young age. I have some questions. Let's go back to that.
Yeah.
Because Emily's dad and I were divorced, and I know that divorce was traumatic, more traumatic on her than her siblings. She was the oldest. And I often wonder if it was the divorce, the trauma of the divorce, that triggered the addiction. Now, having said that, I tried to do everything right, with the divorce, and millions of kids, parents divorce, and they don't become addicts. So I think, as parents who have gone through divorce, that I'm taking a lot on there by saying, oh, and I think it would have been more unhealthy to stay in that relationship for her. I think it could have happened anyway. But go back to your younger self. I know you have so much perspective now, especially because you study this field, so you understand the whys. But what was going through your head when you were 12, 13, 14? And did you start with meth, or did you start with something else?
Yeah, that's a lot of great questions. I'm going to start at the beginning of that. So yeah, I think that divorce can be traumatic. I think they say that, specifically for the older siblings, because they take on more of that parenting role for the kids. But you're right. It doesn't, there's, 50% of marriages end in divorce. So there's a lot of people out there who, could potentially be struggling if that was the end all be all. And I think it's resiliency factor sometimes. And then we have to remember that addiction, there's lots of pieces. So there's this environmental piece and there's also this biological piece. So if people are already predisposed for addiction, it's easier for them to get out of control once they use it as a coping mechanism. So we talk a lot about, first use, it can often be people's choice, not always. Some people are exposed to chemicals when they don't know it or against their will. But oftentimes it is, our choice to have that first use. But after that, if that addiction piece takes over and that biological piece is already in there, it becomes something that our body almost needs, or we crave, or it becomes how we function. And so if that's in there, sometimes people are not in control of it. And oftentimes, when it is addiction, it's a disease of the brain. And so once it becomes out of control, it's out of control. And I don't think that any sort of trauma can do that. And trauma looks different for each and every person. And so what would be traumatic for me in a certain event might not be traumatic for you. I always tell people, if we think about a fire at a kindergarten class, what does that look like for the firefighter versus what does that look like for the kids inside that class? That might be very, very traumatic for a young child to go through, or anybody to go through a fire, but a firefighter is set up to have those coping skills and that resilience. So everything looks just a little bit different. And I think, divorce is hard on everyone, and it just is, but it doesn't have to be a precursor for anything. As far as slingshotting back to, Melissa, I guess she wasn't Mo back then, Melissa at a young age. I don't know what I was thinking. I just was, my life, I always tell my husband this too, like my life before my parents got a divorce was very sunshine and rainbows in my head. I think that my parents, I don't know that they kept me sheltered, but we lived a lot of the farm life and things were just good. And life felt like a storybook, I had two parents that were good. And I just, and so I didn't really see it coming till right at the end. And I think that it kind of shocked me. I think my parents didn't expose me to a lot of what real life could look like. And maybe life wasn't all that crazy for them. So they didn't realize that, there were drugs so readily available to me, and that it could be something that, I fell into. And I think my dad, bless his heart, even when I told him that I struggled with substance use, was like, no, you didn't. He couldn't even hear that, right? As I was an older adult, he was just like, you did? I didn't, you didn't. And I was like, yeah, I did. So, I mean, clearly he wasn't even like able to comprehend what that looked like. So even thinking about him warning me about what things could look like is, not even feasible. And I didn't use meth first. I started smoking cigarettes first, actually. And then I smoked a little bit of weed, although I've never liked the way that weed makes me feel. And then it was as easy as I remember it clearly. The first time I ever did meth, I was in the backseat of a car with a bunch of my friends, and they were just like, here, try this, inhale it. I didn't ask a question. I trusted them. I didn't think they would ever, try and harm me or hurt me. I didn't know what it was going to do to me. But I remember, being up all night, and I had a couple beers, and I was just like, oh man, this is crazy feeling. And I realized that I liked it because it numbed out a lot of other things. And so that's when it became a little bit compulsive for me, because I was like, oh, this is great. Like, it took away all my ability to give a shit or to think about other things that were happening in my life that were not good. So that's kind of, and it was a real slingshot from like smoking cigarettes to getting myself to where I was doing meth.
And so young, 14,
Yeah,
to try
very,
meth.
very
Do you
young.
think you have a sensitive personality?
What do you mean by sensitive?
Well, I just think so many people who find themselves struggling with substance use disorder are extremely sensitive people, and it's a way to cope with a very harsh world.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess it could be. When they put that in terms of trauma, they say, like, I just watched a video on TikTok of all things, about people being a little bit more attuned to what the room looks like. So say you've been through trauma, or you've been through some sort of abuse, and then you're always looking to make sure that you're safe, right? So you're very sensitive to what's going on in an area, or you have that, or you're an empath, some people call it, because you've been through that, and you're like, I don't want that to happen. I don't want to be around that, but I need to know where it is so I can either stay away from it or keep myself safe or keep others safe. So yeah, I think you're pretty spot on with that.
And then you become this welder. You find some sobriety there, in between, as when you had your child, there,
Mhm.
you have a relapse after you have your oldest child. What was it though that really got you to stay off of substances?
It was really, I knew someone needed to take care of my kids. Like, I didn't feel like at that time, I didn't feel like I was still struggling with the addiction part of it. It was more like I could pick it up and try it, and was afraid it would get out of control again. And I knew if I kept doing that while my kid's dad was also struggling, that no one was going to take care of those kids, and that I wanted to be a mom for them. I wanted to break the cycle of BS and just be a mom for them, and step up to the plate. So I knew that I had to do that, and I didn't have a choice really. It was my job.
Another question, when you were younger, you mentioned peers are kind of running with the bad. I don't want to say bad because I don't want to generalize people as bad, but the kids who got in trouble, the kids who would try drugs, there are different kinds of kids out there. Were those kids more accepting of you? Is that why, do you think?
I've thought about this before, and I'm not really sure. I think it was just we had this connection because we'd been through some stuff, right? We had like, oh, mom or dad isn't there, and we could relate in that way. And so I think, yeah, I mean, they were more accepting. I think the other crowd that I used to hang out with when I was, the preppy kid wasn't quite as accepting of me anymore when I was not, not fitting in that place.
Right, right. They could have rejected you and the people that accepted you. And
Yeah.
then as a kid and your frontal lobes aren't fully developed, you'll maybe try something because other people are doing it, like you said, without question.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you were working toward your own recovery and you're working as a welder and you're taking care of kids, do you ever look back and think like, how did I do that? Or even when
Yeah.
you're working on your PhD, I mean, I just can't imagine how difficult that was. And here you have the tendency to want to turn towards substances in difficult times because those would be having small children and working that hard toward a goal, whether it be working hard as at 4 o'clock in the morning as a welder, or whether it be working toward a PhD.
Right.
That's not easy.
Yeah. So there was a lot of, keeping myself in check. And like I said, I struggled with alcohol afterwards. And so once I got into school, then alcohol was a coping mechanism. So I found myself like walking through some of the steps of how we would, train other people to get healthy with myself as I was walking through these addiction classes. And I oftentimes felt like a phony, right? Because I'm like, here I am thinking I'm going to go to school to be this counselor, and I'm still struggling myself. And I don't think anybody saw that. Although if you look back at pictures, it was probably pretty, probably pretty easy to see. I had half pink hair with a mohawk going to school. So, I mean, I kind of had some of these things that might've said, help, I'm struggling. But what I really found was a support group. So at the same time that I decided to go back to college, I found roller derby. And so my best friend at the time and I founded a roller derby group in Sioux City, and I instantly had 40 strong-willed female friends. And I'd never met people like that before. I'd never had a group of people who just had my back from the get-go and were there to help me out with the kids when I needed, and just so supportive. And so when I talk about addiction now, I tell people, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's support. And I've watched it work for myself, and we know it through research, but I had this huge support group. And so I drank for a while in roller derby. It's kind of customary that after, a game, we go out and we have beers together with the other team, and we drink and we just have this great time. And that was good at first until, the addiction piece of me, my biology piece, started kicking in, and I took it a little too far. And so I ended up actually getting drunk one weekend, came home, woke up in the morning this was a Friday night, came home, spent Saturday kind of riding the couch with the kids. And then Monday morning I woke up and I didn't feel good when I woke up. I opened the front door just to get a little blast of fresh air, thinking I just, I don't know, just need a little fresh air. Well, I don't know what happened, but when the fresh air hit me, I passed out and I hit the deck. I broke my eye socket, I broke my nose, and the kids called and got me to the ER. And when I got to the ER, I overhear the nurse go, she's just a drunk. And I was like, what the hell is this lady talking about? I'm like, I haven't drank in 2 days, like I just couldn't even believe that that came out of that lady's mouth. And I just heard her through like the curtain at the ER. And so I'm hurt. I'm like, oh, whatever. And they must have blood alcohol test me, and I must have still had alcohol in my system even on Monday. Right. So that was it. Not only was it the injury, I had a huge like scar on my eye. It looked bad. I hurt, it was a lot of things. It was my rock bottom, if you will. But that lady calling me an alcoholic was really the clincher. I was just like, no, I am not an alcoholic. That is not what I want to be. That is not who I stand for. That is not where I'm going to go. And that same day, across the world. My friend got into a car accident and she was drinking, and we decided that's it, we're getting sober together. And we were the best of friends, and we just portrayed our sobriety all over social media, all over roller derby, and it was so cool. We inspired other people to get sober that would reach out to us and send us messages saying, hey, if you guys can do it, we can do it too. And it was just really, really amazing. And so that's how I truly got sober. I have been alcohol free for almost 11 years now, and there's no looking back, right? But going through the process of, having the time as a welder to sit behind my helmet, burning myself, unfortunately, but sit behind my helmet and thinking about what life could be like, changing my thoughts from negative to positive, learning how to have some of those coping skills to navigate life, navigate friendships, navigate feelings, and then getting into school and really learning, like, what does the brain do? Oh, this was the developmental spot I was at, or oh, this is how addiction hijacked me, hijacked my kid's dad, how it works in other people. And so now when I look at people, it's like, what happened to you to get you to this place? What things came into your life that made that happen, that slungshot you into addiction? Or do we know that you have, a precursor to addiction that we need to take into control? And so I just look at people so much different now, and it gives me this ability to give everybody a first shake and a first shot and be able to help them, opposed to going, oh, you're just this, or you're just that, or you don't have the willpower, you're not strong enough, because that's not the case. There's lots of things that come into play when people are struggling with addiction.
I want to go back to your overdoses that you spoke about. A couple of times you overdosed, always on
Uh,
amphetamine type drugs, because
yep.
those are on the rise right now. Meth overdose deaths are on the rise. And I did speak with one mother who lost her son to meth overdose, but you don't hear about that as much as you do opioids.
No, you're right. And I didn't at first, I mean, the first two, well, yeah, the first time it happened, I didn't even know that that was a thing, or that that could happen. I had no idea. I was maybe 17. And, we talked, and I've talked to you before about, Good Samaritan laws and how to keep people safe. When I was overdosing, I was begging the person I was with to take me to the hospital because I knew something wasn't right. I knew I was not in a good place, and they would not take me to the hospital. And I remember just waking up. I drove this little itty bitty car, and I was in the passenger seat. The other person was driving, and I was on the floorboards of the car when I woke up at my house. And I was like, oh, I made it, but there, that could have went definitely different. I passed out for a while, and I guess my body kind of put itself back into homeostasis, and I was okay. And so, yeah, it is quite terrifying. And I don't think people, understand what it looks like or how they can help people who are in that space and not get themselves in trouble.
So, what do you think is most misunderstood about addiction?
Oh man, the things I've already talked about, I just think the stigma behind what addiction truly looks like. Like I said, it's not often their choice to keep going. Once those components are already there, I would call it the perfect storm, right? If you have that perfect storm to be susceptible to addiction, and you don't have the support and the help to get out of that, oftentimes it just keeps exacerbating until you can figure out, oh, I need help in this way, and I have to search for it. There has to be a component of people wanting to move forward to get themselves some help, but they may not know how to ask for that. Their way of asking for that might be robbing you because they need money for their drugs, right? Like, it just may not look like you would want it to look. I also talk to my students a lot about the religious piece of addiction. If you don't find God, you can't get clean. And that's not for everyone. Not everybody believes in that. And that's fine. Everybody has their own, ability to believe in whatever they want, as well as this worked for my dad. This is how my dad got sober, and this will work for you. We have to remember that it's, person first. That person might have different, walked a different life, different ideologies, and we need to figure out, what works for that person. And so I think there's a lot of things that come into play where I could just say it has to be person first. It has to be, the recovery has to be about the person. And a lot of times we don't have the system set up like that. And so people do fall through the cracks. They're like, oh, you went to treatment, but you didn't get sober. Well, yeah, probably not. First of all, treatment is not long enough. Second of all, it's expensive. Third, what if you're female and you're a single mom? I could not have went to treatment. I would have had, no one would have been able to take care of my kids. And there's just lots of little things that come into play where each person has these own, situational factors that we don't take into consideration as in general. And so we're not meeting them where they're at or having their needs met. So we're not giving them that individualized care. And yeah, they are coming out of treatment and relapsing because they didn't quite get the care that they needed in order to, keep moving forward. Although there are lots of things that are put into place for us to help, seal some of those gaps.
Well, and no two addictions are exactly the same.
Mhm.
But if the solution to addiction is connection, and so many people who are suffering avoid that, right? They fight
Yeah.
it. It's so hard for families and loved ones to know what to do.
It is, yeah. As you know, I'm writing a book, and that's a huge piece of it. How can people who love someone with addiction foster their recovery in a way that's not pushy or enabling, if you will? And what does that look like? And the answer is hard because the answer is so over here and over there. And it's just, love and support and just letting them know that you're there. If you feel like they're taking advantage of you, stop giving them money, buy them food. If they're, if they say they're hungry and they want, some money, cool. How about I make you something to eat versus, giving you money that you might go spend on, your substance of choice. So
And the real issue now is though, rock bottom is death, because of the drug supply, because fentanyl is in everything, including meth and
right.
uppers and including opioids, everything. So it's such a dangerous thing. And it's so hard to navigate. You have this deadly thing, your loved one who's using or suffering from substance use disorder, or you yourself. And at any moment you could take something and die within minutes. So it's such a hard time.
Yeah, it's absolutely so much scarier than when I used, right? 20 years ago or whatever. It wasn't, I mean, yes, that could have happened to me, but it seems like it's so much scarier now. And I think that's why instead of getting into counseling, because I am a bit of an empath and maybe don't have the boundaries to cut some of those things off, I feel like I would be at people's houses trying to help them all day long. I got into prevention because that's where I feel like the importance is, right? So go back to that 12-year-old Melissa that we were talking about, right? So what if I would have had some prevention efforts then? And yes, DARE was in our school, but that was a one-time thing. So it didn't give me kind of that dose when I needed it. But what if, we would have had some more prevention efforts saying like, this is what meth is, this is what meth does, here's how it could impact you, versus me going, oh, hey, yeah, cool, I'll try it, whatever, like this is what my friends are doing. So I need to fit in because I need some sort of, it's filling some void for me, or just because I'm a teenager and wants to fit in. And so I think that it's so important that we get, this prevention to people so they truly know what it looks like, right? And not those scary, prevention things. This is your brain on drugs, or, other horrible prevention effort ads that we could think about and probably chuckle about because they're so horrible. But really getting to people. And so that's really where I started. I went to juvenile detention centers. I went to prisons. I spoke at anywhere that would let me speak about what addiction looked like, coming from a lived experience standpoint and coming from an education standpoint. So that way we could say, hey, this is why prevention is so important.
Tell me about the book that you're working on.
Yeah, thanks. Awesome. So yeah, I'm writing a book called The Addiction Book, and it's really focused to anyone, right? So people who are in the field working with other humans, which is a lots of everyone, right? But those frontline workers who may not know how to have those conversations. So not looking at the addiction field, but looking at just regular people. So are you a dental hygienist? Are you a nurse? Are you a doctor? Are you this? Are you that? How do you have those conversations with people? Or what truly does addiction look like? Again, like you said, I have a unique standpoint from, lived experience and education standpoint. And then what does it look like for someone who loves someone who's struggling with addiction issues? What does that connection look like in all these different pieces? So biology, what does pain look like when it comes to addiction? How can we navigate those pain pieces? Because that's so hard. And then if you are someone who's struggling with addiction, there's some tidbits about how does your brain work? What is it doing? How can you, find your motivation again? What do those things look like? And then how can we advocate? How can we all work together to make sure that, we understand addiction as a society, we stop stigmatizing people, and we start getting them the help that they need. If you look at Portugal decriminalized drugs in, what was it, 2000. And in the last 22 years, they have had this extreme change, right? But when we hear the word decriminalization, some people just, hit the brakes and they can't hear anything after that, right? But when we are able to reach those people where they're at with their disease of the brain, we can get them the help that we need, right? But when we put that red check on their box that says that they're a felon or they've been in jail or they've done this or that, it really can take away their ability to actually heal and get help. And so when we decriminalize, and I say that in air quotes, when we decriminalize drugs, we allow them to, get this slap on the hand, but also tell them, okay, here's your slap on the hand, but here's your next steps. Here's where your support is. Here's where your help is. And so we can get them the help that they need with their disease. If we had somebody who was struggling with, issues with their heart and they relapsed and had an issue, or they started eating poor again, and then their body started getting out of whack, we wouldn't, go, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. We should definitely put you in jail. We wouldn't do that, right? Or if it was a diabetic who had a change in their body and they needed more medication, we wouldn't do that to them. And there's just so much stigma out there for people who struggle with opioid use disorder. They have medications specific for OUD. And even people who are in the field and people who have struggled with addiction are like, oh, you're just changing one drug for another, when these drugs were specifically made to help those people with, opioid use disorder. So we have to really just break those stigmas. And I'm hoping to do that with this book, and just, talking with people like you and supporting you along the way too. So
Yeah, well, we really appreciate you being on the Emily's Hope board and helping on the education committee with the prevention education. Because as you said, I think we have to get to kids at a very young age and explain in ways they can understand what's going on with the brain, what happens to the brain on substances, so that they don't make that choice to use, because you don't know at first use. Well, the younger it is, obviously, the more at risk they are. But you also don't know who's going to experiment and try something. And so many parents want to look the other way, or, oh, that's a rite of passage, even alcohol, but you don't know how many of those kids are going to, their brains, something's going to turn on in their brains and they're going to become addicted. You just don't
yes.
know.
Absolutely. And it's my pleasure to do both of those things. But you're right. We just have to get them to a place where they can advocate for themselves. And I think at this stage in my life, I'm so angry at alcohol because like you said, it's a rite of passage. Oh, they're going to drink because they're 21, or they're going to have 21 beers because they turned 21 and their parents are there supporting this process. And how do you know that they're not going to be the next, person who is struggling? And I always, it hurts my heart for colleges, right? Because that's kind of the atmosphere, right? And I did my dissertation on college substance use. And so I see what it is and the binge drinking that happens and how that can slingshot us from one place to the next. And it hurts my heart, right? We don't have to be a society that says, oh, you're a mom? Well, you should have some wine. You had a long day being a mom. You should drink a whole bottle of wine. We don't have to be that society. That's what, the people who market alcohol want us to think. And so we fall victim to, oh, it's Budweiser, we're doing Budweiser things, or whatever, booze it is. But that makes me angry, right? Because we're hurting people at a young age. Or, oh, they can drink in my house, doesn't matter what age they are. Okay, but their brain isn't fully developed. So why would we put them in a place where they could, harm themselves or the functioning of their brain, which is what we're teaching where we're putting together for the prevention efforts, is to let them know, these things can impact your brain. And so if parents have a different view, or what I would call a skewed view, if you will, about what substances or alcohol looks like, then we can help them have some of that education for themselves. And hopefully they'll advocate for themselves, even against some of those peer pressures and other things that might come into play with children. So I'm excited.
Right. We need a societal shift, not only in how we view the person who is suffering from substance use disorder, and we, erase the stigma with that and understand it as a disease of the brain. We also need a societal shift in how we glorify the use of alcohol, and now for sure weed and other substances, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely put it as a thing that we just do. And not every country does that. And they don't see some of the substance use issues that we do here, because we think it's okay.
Well, what would you like the addiction studies program to become at USD? I know you've been there, you've had your doctorate for a while now, and yeah, I've got the chance to meet some of your students, and sounds like you're doing really great things.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I hope to get more research coming out of our department. I think it's really important for us to, be doing that research component, but branching out and working with places like Emily's Hope and other, establishments that know that the addiction counseling department is there and we're ready to help, and we have interns and we have all sorts of great stuff. I'm just hoping that everybody knows, what we're doing, and just breaking that stigma together and advocating for our profession and why we need to increase the workforce and get help to these people that need it, to have that support piece and to get people healthy, because that's what we really want, right? Is to keep people alive. So
Right. Accessible, affordable, good help
yes,
within a medical system is so needed, so desperately needed to save lives.
yes,
Really.
absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you sharing your story and your talents, and I admire you and everything you've been through.
Oh, thank
You
you.
really have turned things around. I know nobody's life is perfect. I know that, but
Right.
you're remarried. You have a young child.
Mhm.
So you have 3 kids total.
I have 3 kids. Yep.
And how old is your baby?
She'll be 4 here pretty soon, so getting old
4.
already.
Okay. Yeah. Well, congratulations on your success and everything that you've been able to do with your life, because it could have gone very differently.
It very well could have. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Grieving Out Loud with me, your host, Angela Kennedy. Connect with us online at emilyshope.foundation. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider giving us a positive review. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage.